The October wind cut through the bare maple trees surrounding the old Miller house like frozen razors, rattling the windows of what had once been the most beautiful home on Sycamore Street. Sarah Chen pulled her wool coat tighter as she stood. Before the Victorian's weathered front porch, the realtor's keys heavy in her gloved hand. 27 years had passed since her family had lived here. 27 years since the night that split her world in two. I-95. Her 8-year-old brother Danny had vanished from this very house during a sleepover, disappearing without a trace while their parents hosted a dinner party downstairs. The police had searched every room, every closet, every possible hiding place. They'd found nothing. Danny Chen had simply evaporated into the Minnesota night, leaving behind only questions that had haunted Sarah's family until her parents' deaths 5 years ago. But now, at 35, Sarah was back. The inheritance had finally cleared probate, and she'd driven up from Minneapolis to prepare the house for sale. She hadn't set foot inside since that terrible October night in 1995, but the medical bills from her mother's cancer treatment had drained the family savings. This house was all that remained of her parents' legacy, and she needed the money. The front door's brass lock turned with surprising ease, as if it had been waiting for her return. The smell hit her immediately. Not the expected mustiness of an abandoned house, but something else, something organic and unsettling that made her stomach clench. Sarah fumbled for the light switch, her fingers trembling slightly as fluorescent bulbs flickered to life, illuminating the dust-covered furniture draped in white sheets. Everything looked smaller than she remembered. The grand staircase that had seemed so imposing in her childhood now appeared narrow and ordinary. The Persian rug where she and Danny had played countless games of checkers was faded and threadbare, but the memories came flooding back anyway. Danny's infectious laugh, the way he'd always let her win at board games, his obsession with building elaborate fort systems throughout the house. Sarah moved through the rooms methodically, taking inventory. The dining room where her parents' friends had sat that night, oblivious to the horror unfolding upstairs. The kitchen where her mother had prepared countless family meals, where Danny had stolen cookies from the jar shaped like a frog. The living room where the police officers had set up their command center, their radios crackling with updates that never came. She climbed the stairs slowly, each creak of the old wood echoing in the empty house. Danny's room was exactly as they'd left it. The police had told her parents not to disturb anything, just in case. His bed was still unmade, the blue dinosaur comforter tangled at the foot. Model airplanes hung from fishing line attached to the ceiling, casting strange shadows in the overhead light. His bookshelf was packed with Hardy Boys mysteries and comic books, their colorful spines faded by years of sunlight streaming through the window. Sarah sat on the edge of his bed, running her fingers over the dinosaur pattern. She could almost hear his voice, chattering excitedly about whatever had captured his imagination that day. Danny had been brilliant, reading at a high school level by age 8, constantly asking questions that stumped adults. "Where did you go, little brother? What happened to you?" She'd been in college when he disappeared, home for a long weekend that was supposed to be filled with family time. Instead, it had become the worst night of her life. She'd been in her own room, studying for midterm exams with her headphones on, while Danny had his friend Marcus over for what was meant to be a typical sleepover. When she'd finally emerged for a late-night snack, she'd found her parents frantically searching the house. Danny and Marcus were nowhere to be found. Marcus had been discovered 3 hours later, wandering Highway 10 in his pajamas, completely catatonic. He'd never spoken about that night, not to the police, not to his parents, not to the child psychologists who'd tried to help him. Whatever he'd witnessed had locked itself so deep in his mind that 30 years of therapy hadn't been able to extract it. He lived in a care facility now, Sarah had heard, lost in a world of his own making. The official investigation had lasted 6 months. The FBI had been called in after local police found no leads. They'd interviewed everyone at the dinner party, searched the surrounding woods with dogs and helicopters, questioned registered sex offenders within a 50-mile radius. Nothing. Danny Chen had become another face on a milk carton, another cold case in a filing cabinet somewhere in the Hennepin County Sheriff's Office. Sarah stood and walked to Danny's closet, sliding open the door she hadn't touched in decades. His clothes still hung there, tiny jeans and striped shirts, a Minnesota Twins jersey he'd begged their parents to buy. At the back of the closet, she noticed something she'd forgotten, a small door that led to the storage space under the eaves. Danny had called it his secret hideout, though it was barely large enough for a child to crawl into. She knelt and opened the little door, expecting to find forgotten toys or comics. Instead, her flashlight beam revealed something that made her blood freeze. The wooden wall at the back of the storage space was wrong. The boards didn't match the rest of the house's construction, and there were gaps between them, gaps that seemed to pulse slightly, as if something behind them was breathing. Sarah stared at the wall for a long moment, her heart hammering against her ribs. It had to be an optical illusion, maybe caused by air pressure changes in the old house. But as she watched, she could swear she saw the wood expanding and contracting in a slow, rhythmic pattern. Like lungs, like something alive was trapped behind those boards. She backed out of the storage space quickly, her hands shaking as she closed the small door. This was impossible. The police had searched every inch of this house. There couldn't be anything behind that wall. Could there? But as Sarah stood in her brother's empty room, surrounded by the ghosts of childhood laughter, she couldn't shake the feeling that the house itself was trying to tell her something. Something it had been hiding for 27 years. The breathing wall called to her from behind the closet door, and for the first time since 1995, Sarah Chen felt a flicker of hope mixed with terror. Maybe, just maybe, some secrets were finally ready to be revealed. Sarah spent a restless night at the Comfort Inn on Highway 10. The image of that breathing wall burned into her retinas. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw those wooden boards, pulsing with unnatural life. She'd tried to convince herself it was just old wood settling, thermal expansion, anything rational. But at 3 a.m., staring at the motel ceiling with traffic humming past her window, she knew she had to go back. The morning brought gray skies and the first snow flurries of the season. Tiny crystals that melted immediately on the windshield of her Honda Civic. Sarah drove through downtown Pine Lake, population 8,247, according to the weathered sign at the city limits. Not much had changed in the decades since she'd lived here. Muller's hardware store still occupied the corner of Main and First, its red-painted facade now showing rust stains. The Pine Lake Diner still advertised the world's best apple pie in faded letters across its front window. Even the gas station where she stopped for coffee looked exactly the same, complete with the handwritten signs advertising fishing bait and lottery tickets. The young clerk behind the counter looked familiar, and Sarah realized he had the same sandy hair and prominent nose as Tom Brennan, her old high school classmate. "You're a Brennan, aren't you?" she asked as he rang up her purchase. "Yes, ma'am. Jake Brennan. Tom's my dad." The kid couldn't be more than 19, probably working, part-time while attending community college. "You from around here?" "I used to be. Sarah Chen. My family lived on Sycamore Street." Jake's expression shifted, recognition flickering in his eyes. In a town like Pine Lake, everyone knew everyone else's story, especially the tragic ones. "Oh, wow, I heard about your brother. That was way before I was born, but people still talk about it sometimes. I'm really sorry about what happened." Sarah nodded, accustomed to these conversations. "Thank you. Actually, I was wondering, is Sheriff Kowalski still around? He worked my brother's case." "Nah, he retired like 10 years ago. Sheriff Garcia runs things now. Nice lady. Real professional. You thinking about reopening the case or something?" "Maybe. I'm just trying to tie up some loose ends." Sarah pocketed her change and headed back to her car, but Jake's voice stopped her. "Hey, Mrs. Chen? If you're looking into old stuff about your brother, you might want to talk to Mr. Henderson. He lives over on Elm Street now, but he used to be our neighbor when I was little. He's always been real interested in unsolved cases and local history. Weird guy, but harmless, you know?" Sarah thanked him and made a mental note. Right now, though, she needed to return to that wall. She needed to understand what she'd seen, even if it meant crawling back into that cramped storage space. The Miller house looked even more foreboding in the gray morning light. Sarah let herself in and climbed the stairs to Danny's room, her footsteps echoing in the empty house. The memory of the previous evening felt like a dream now, but when she opened the closet door and knelt before the small storage entrance, her pulse quickened. This time, she came prepared. She'd bought a better flashlight at the hardware store, along with a tape measure and a small crowbar. If there was something behind that wall, she was going to find it. The storage space was even more cramped than she remembered, forcing her to army crawl on her elbows to reach the back wall. Her flashlight beam played across the wooden boards, and she could see immediately that her memory hadn't deceived her. These boards were newer than the rest of the house's construction, rough pine instead of the aged oak used throughout the Victorians' original framework. More disturbing still, she could feel air movement. Not the random drafts common in old houses, but a regular, rhythmic flow, as if something behind the wall was indeed breathing. Sarah pressed her ear against the wood. The sound was faint but unmistakable, a slow, deliberate pattern that made her skin crawl. She'd read enough true crime books to know that sometimes the impossible turned out to be merely improbable. Sometimes the answers were hidden in places no one thought to look. She positioned the crowbar against the edge of one board and applied gentle pressure. The wood was held in place by recent screws, not the original square nails used in the rest of the house. Someone had built this wall deliberately, and recently enough that the screws came out with minimal effort. The first board came away easily, revealing a gap about 6 inches wide. Sarah's flashlight beam penetrated the darkness. Beyond, and what she saw made her gasp. The space behind the false wall was larger than she'd expected. Not just a storage area, but an actual room, and there was something moving in there. She removed 2 more boards, creating an opening large enough to squeeze through. The air that flowed from the hidden space carried a smell she recognized but couldn't identify. Something organic and unsettling, like the scent of a greenhouse combined with something else. Something wrong. Sarah took a deep breath and squeezed through the opening, her flashlight sweeping across the hidden room. What she found defied explanation. The space was about 8 feet by 12 feet, carved out of the area between the main house and the garage. The walls were lined with some kind of organic material, not wood or drywall, but something that looked almost like bark or dried skin, and the entire room pulsed gently, expanding and contracting in that same rhythmic pattern she'd noticed in the wall. But it was the contents of the room that made Sarah's knees buckle. Along one wall, carefully arranged on makeshift shelves, were dozens of children's belongings. toys, clothing, books, all sized for kids between about 6 and 12 years old. And all of it looked like it had been collected over many years. The center of the room sat a child-sized table and chairs, set as if for a tea party that had been interrupted. The plates and cups were plastic, decorated with cartoon characters from different eras. Sarah recognized some items from the 80s, others from the 90s, and still others that looked much more recent. On the table, arranged like place settings, were photographs, school pictures, family snapshots, the kind of images that appeared on missing child posters. Sarah's hands shook as she approached the table, and her heart nearly stopped when she saw the photo in the center. It was Danny's third-grade school picture, the same photo the police had used in their search efforts. But this copy was different. Someone had written on it in red ink, "Welcome home, Danny. We've been waiting for you." Around Danny's photo were arranged at least a dozen others, children of various ages, all with that same formal school picture smile. Sarah recognized none of them, but the dates written on the backs of the photos spanned decades. The earliest was from 1973. The most recent was from just last year. Sarah backed away from the table, her mind reeling. This wasn't just a hiding place, it was a shrine. Someone had been collecting these children's belongings, these photographs, for almost 50 years, and somehow this room was alive. The walls continued their slow, hypnotic breathing, as if the space itself was a living organism. She needed to call the police immediately. This was evidence in dozens of missing children cases, potentially dating back half a century. But first, she needed to document everything. Sarah pulled out her phone and began taking pictures, her hands steady despite the horror of what she was seeing. As she photographed the wall of children's belongings, something caught her eye. Hidden behind a stack of moldy comic books was a small wooden box. Sarah opened it carefully, and inside found something that made her stomach lurch. A collection of children's teeth, each one carefully labeled with a name and date. The most recent entry was dated just 3 months ago. Lily Morrison, age 7, July 15, 2022. Sarah's blood ran cold. If this was recent, then whoever was responsible might still be active, might still be taking children. And judging by the careful organization of this hideous collection, they'd been doing it for a very long time. She needed to get out of this breathing room, needed to call for help. But as she turned toward the opening she'd created, Sarah heard something that made her freeze. Footsteps. Someone was in the house, and they were climbing the stairs. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as the footsteps reached the top of the stairs. She switched off her flashlight and pressed herself against the far wall of the breathing room, praying that whoever was in the house wouldn't notice the displaced boards or the opening she'd created. The organic walls pulsed around her in the darkness, and she had to fight the urge to scream. "Hello? Sarah, are you in here?" The voice was male, friendly, and completely unexpected. "It's Walter Henderson. Jake Brennan at the gas station said you might want to talk to me about your brother's case." Sarah exhaled slowly, her terror transforming into relief and then suspicion. How had Henderson known she was here? And why had he come looking for her? She crawled quickly through the opening and began replacing the wooden boards as quietly as possible. She managed to get 2 back in place before Henderson's voice came from directly outside Danny's room. "Sarah? I saw your car in the driveway. I hope you don't mind me letting myself in. I still have a key from when I used to check on the house for your parents." She scrambled out of the closet and closed the door just as Henderson appeared in Danny's doorway. He was exactly what she'd expected based on Jake's description. A thin man in his 60s with wild gray hair and thick glasses that magnified his pale blue eyes. He wore a cardigan that had seen better days and carried a manila folder thick with papers. "Mr. Henderson," Sarah said, hoping her voice sounded normal. "You startled me. I was just looking through some of Danny's old things." Henderson's gaze swept the room, lingering for a moment on the closet door. "Of course, this must be very difficult for you. I've followed your brother's case for years, you know. It's always haunted me, living so close to where it happened. Such a bright boy. Such a mystery." There was something in his tone that made Sarah uncomfortable, though she couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was. Maybe it was the way his eyes seemed to catalog every detail of the room, or the possessive way he spoke about Danny's case. "Jake said you're interested in local history?" "Among other things." Henderson stepped into the room, his fingers trailing, along Danny's old bookshelf. "I've lived in Pine Lake my whole life, seen a lot of changes. The Miller house has always fascinated me. Such beautiful architecture, such unfortunate history. Your parents were lovely people, by the way. I was sorry to hear about their passing." "Thank you." Sarah watched as Henderson moved closer to the closet, and she felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October weather. "What did you want to discuss about Danny's case?" Henderson opened his manila folder and pulled out a thick stack of newspaper clippings, photocopied police reports, and what looked like hand-drawn maps. "I've been doing my own research over the years. Unofficial, of course, but quite thorough. There are patterns, Sarah. Connections that the police missed." He spread some of the papers on Danny's old desk, and Sarah reluctantly moved closer to look. The newspaper clippings were from various Minnesota papers, all reporting missing children. Cases dating back decades. Henderson had highlighted certain details in yellow marker and connected them with red pen lines that looked disturbingly similar to the conspiracy boards she'd seen in crime documentaries. "Look at the dates," Henderson said, his finger stabbing at the clippings. "Jenny Morrison, 1973. Timothy Walsh, 1981. Rebecca Chen, that's your brother, 1995. Lily Morrison, just this past July. All children between 6 and 12, all disappeared. From within a 20-mile radius of Pine Lake. All cases that went cold within months." Sarah's blood turned to ice when she saw the last name on his list. Lily Morrison, the same name she'd just seen in that hideous collection of teeth. Lily Morrison disappeared this year? 3 months ago. 7 years old. Vanished from a camping trip at Bear Creek State Park. The police think she wandered off and fell in the lake, but they never found a body. Henderson's eyes gleamed behind his thick glasses. "I don't think she fell in any lake." "What do you think happened to her?" Henderson leaned closer, and Sarah caught a whiff of his cologne, something heavy and cloying that reminded her of funeral parlors. "I think someone took her. The same someone who's been taking children from this area for 50 years. Someone who knows these woods, who understands how to move without being seen. Someone local." Sarah studied the timeline Henderson had created. If he was right, there was a pattern. Children disappearing every 8 to 10 years, just long enough for the community's vigilance to relax. "Have you shared this with the police?" "Oh, yes. Many times over the years. Sheriff Kowalski used to humor me, but I could tell he thought I was just a lonely old man with too much time on his hands." Henderson's voice carried a bitter edge. "Sheriff Garcia is more professional about it, but I can see the same skepticism in her eyes. They think correlation isn't causation, that I'm seeing patterns where none exist." Sarah looked more closely at the map Henderson had drawn. He'd marked each disappearance site with a red X, and she could see what he meant about the pattern. They formed a rough circle around Pine Lake, with the longest gaps between disappearances in the south, toward Minneapolis, and the shortest gaps in the north, where the forest grew thicker and homes were more isolated. "Why are you showing me this?" Sarah asked. Henderson gathered his papers slowly, his movements deliberate. "Because you're the only family member who's ever come back. The other families either moved away or—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Well, let's just say, the not knowing tends to consume people. Your parents never gave up hope, but it aged them terribly." Sarah thought about the breathing room hidden behind Danny's closet, about the collection of children's belongings and that horrifying box of teeth. She needed to call the police immediately, but something held her back. If Henderson had been researching this for years, if he'd been tracking a pattern the police had missed, maybe he could help her understand what she'd found. "Mr. Henderson," she said carefully, "hypothetically speaking, if someone had been taking these children over all these years, where do you think they might have hidden them?" Henderson's pale eyes sharpened with interest. "That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Somewhere isolated, certainly. Somewhere with good acoustic privacy. Screaming children make noise. Somewhere that wouldn't be searched routinely." He paused, studying Sarah's face. "Why do you ask? Have you found something?" Sarah hesitated. There was something about Henderson that bothered her, something beyond his obvious obsession with the case. Maybe it was the way he seemed to know so much about the missing children, or the way his eyes kept drifting toward Danny's closet. Or maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe it was the way he'd appeared so conveniently just after she'd made her discovery. "Just thinking out loud," she said finally. "It's hard being back here, you know? I keep expecting to find some clue the police missed, some answer that would explain everything." Henderson nodded sympathetically, but she noticed his hands clenching and unclenching around his manila folder. "Of course, the need for closure is natural. But Sarah, if you do happen to find anything at all, I hope you'll share it with me before you involve the authorities. Sometimes evidence needs to be properly contextualized before it's presented to law enforcement." The way he said it made Sarah's skin crawl. There was something hungry in his expression, something that didn't match his grandfatherly appearance. "I should probably get going," she said, moving toward the doorway. "Thank you for showing me your research." Henderson blocked her path subtly, not quite threatening but making it clear he wasn't finished with the conversation. "Sarah, I hope you understand how important this is to me. I've devoted the better part of my life to understanding what happened to these children. If there are answers to be found, I deserve to be part of discovering them." "Of course," Sarah said, though every instinct was screaming at her to get away from this man. "I have your number from the phone book, right? I'll call you if I think of anything." Henderson stepped aside, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. "I'm looking forward to hearing from you. And Sarah, be careful poking around old houses. Sometimes the past doesn't want to stay buried." As soon as Henderson left, Sarah locked the front door and pulled out her phone. She needed to call the YA police immediately and report what she'd found. But first, she had one more thing to check. She climbed back upstairs to Danny's room and opened the closet door. The boards she'd replaced were gone. Someone had removed them while she'd been talking to Henderson, and the opening to the breathing room gaped like a wound in the back wall. The room beyond was empty now. No table, no photographs, no collection of children's belongings. Even the organic material that had lined the walls was gone, leaving only bare wooden studs. But pinned to one of the studs was a note written in red ink on lined paper. "Welcome home, Sarah. We've been waiting for you, too." Sarah stumbled backward, her mind reeling. Either she was losing her sanity, Or someone had been watching her every move since she'd arrived in Pine Lake. Someone who could access the house at will, who could clean out an entire room in the space of a 20-minute conversation. Someone who knew she'd found their secret and wasn't planning to let her leave town alive. Sarah stood frozen in Danny's closet, staring at the note that proved she hadn't imagined the breathing room. The red ink seemed to pulse in the flashlight beam, and she could swear the words were written in the same hand that had marked Danny's photograph. But who could have moved all that evidence so quickly? And how had they known exactly when to do it? She photographed the note from every angle, then carefully removed it from the wooden stud. The paper was recent. Standard notebook paper, not aged or yellowed. Whoever had left it wanted her to know they were still active, still watching. The message was clear. They knew she'd discovered their secret, and they weren't afraid of her. Sarah's hands shook as she dialed 911. When the dispatcher answered, she forced her voice to remain steady. "This is Sarah Chen. I'm at 412 Sycamore Street in Pine Lake, and I need to report evidence related to missing children cases. I think I've found where someone has been hiding victims. Ma'am, are you in immediate danger?" Sarah looked around the empty closet, listening to the old house creak around her. "I don't think so, but someone has been in this house. They moved evidence while I was here. I think they're watching me. We're dispatching officers to your location immediately. Please stay on the line and move to a secure area of the house." Sarah hurried downstairs to the front door, checking that it was locked and positioning herself where she could see both the front yard and the back door through the kitchen. While she waited, she scrolled through the photos on her phone, documenting what she'd seen in the breathing room. The images were clear. The table set for children. The photographs. The shelves of belongings. Even if the physical evidence was gone, she had proof that it had existed. 2 Pine Lake police cruisers arrived within 10 minutes, followed by a white SUV with Sheriff emblazoned on the side. Sarah watched through the front window as 4 officers approached the house, their hands resting casually on their service weapons. The woman who climbed out of the sheriff's vehicle was younger than Sarah had expected, maybe 40, with short, dark hair and the confident bearing of someone accustomed to command. "Ms. Chen? I'm Sheriff Garcia. We spoke on the phone." The sheriff's voice was professional but not unsympathetic. "I understand you believe you found evidence related to your brother's disappearance?" Sarah invited them in and led them upstairs to Danny's room, explaining what she'd discovered that morning. As she described the breathing room and its contents, she watched the officers' faces for signs of skepticism. To their credit, they listened without interruption, taking notes and asking clarifying questions. "And you say all of this evidence was removed while you were speaking with Walter Henderson?" Sheriff Garcia asked. "That's right. I was downstairs talking to him for maybe 20 minutes, and when I came back up, everything was gone. But they left this." Sarah showed them the note, careful to handle it only by the edges. Sheriff Garcia studied the message, her expression grim. "We'll need to process this for fingerprints and handwriting analysis. Can you walk us through exactly what you found in the hidden room?" Sarah pulled out her phone and showed them the photographs. The officers gathered around the small screen, and she could see their skepticism transforming into concern as they scrolled through the images. The pictures were undeniably real, showing a meticulously organized collection that could only represent decades of criminal activity. "Jesus," muttered one of the younger officers. "Is that a box of teeth?" "We need to tear this closet apart," Sheriff Garcia said. "If there was a hidden room here, there might be traces left behind, and we need to canvass the neighborhood immediately. Someone saw whoever removed this evidence." The next 2 hours passed in a blur of activity. Crime scene technicians arrived with equipment to examine the storage space behind Danny's closet. They found traces of the organic material that had lined the walls, fragments that one tech described as some kind of fungal growth, possibly cultivated. They also found screw holes in the wooden framework, confirming Sarah's description of how the false wall had been constructed. While the technicians worked, Sheriff Garcia interviewed Sarah in detail about her conversation with Walter Henderson. Sarah found herself analyzing every word of their interaction, looking for clues she might have missed. "You said Henderson seemed particularly interested in the closet?" Sheriff Garcia asked. "He kept looking at it, and he seemed to know more about the house than he should have. He mentioned having a key to check on the property for my parents, but they never mentioned that to me." Sheriff Garcia made a note. "We'll be speaking with Mr. Henderson. In the meantime, I don't think you should stay in this house. Is there somewhere else you can go?" Sarah had been dreading this question. She couldn't afford to stay at the motel indefinitely, and she had no friends or family left in Pine Lake. "I guess I'll have to drive back to Minneapolis. But Sheriff, what about the investigation? This could be connected to dozens of missing children cases." "We'll be in touch, I promise. But whoever did this knows you're here, knows what you found. Until we understand the scope of what we're dealing with, I'd feel better if you weren't in town." As if summoned by their conversation, one of the technicians called from upstairs. "Sheriff, you need to see this." They climbed back to Danny's room, where the technician was kneeling in the storage space with a UV light. "Look at this," he said, playing the purple beam across the wooden framework. Under the ultraviolet light, writing appeared on the walls. Words and symbols that had been invisible to the naked eye. "It's some kind of log," the technician continued. "Names, dates, what looks like measurements or weights. And there's something else." He moved the UV light to a section of wall near the opening. The light revealed a handprint, much smaller than an adult's, pressed into what looked like dried blood. Sarah's knees buckled, and Sheriff Garcia caught her arm. "That could be Danny's," she whispered. "He could have been alive in there, trying to get out." "We don't know that," Sheriff Garcia said firmly. "This could be evidence from any number of cases. We need to process everything carefully before we draw conclusions." But Sarah could see the truth in the sheriff's eyes. The hidden room wasn't just a storage space for trophies. It had been a prison. Children had been kept alive in that breathing space, possibly for extended periods. And if the organic material was some kind of fungal growth, it suggested the room had been designed to sustain life, to keep victims alive for reasons Sarah didn't want to contemplate. As the crime scene team continued their work, Sarah found herself thinking about Henderson's research. If he was right about the pattern of disappearances, if children had been vanishing from the area for 50 years, then this wasn't the work of a single individual. It was too organized, too systematic. Someone had been planning this for decades, possibly passing their methods down to a successor. Sheriff Garcia's radio crackled with an incoming message. "Sheriff, we've got a problem. We went to interview Walter Henderson at his residence, but his neighbors say they haven't seen him since yesterday. His car's gone, and it looks like he left in a hurry." Sarah felt ice water flowing through her veins. Henderson had vanished immediately after discovering that she'd found the hidden room. Either he was involved in the disappearances, or he'd fled because he knew who was responsible and feared for his own safety. "There's something else," the radio continued. "We ran the plates on Henderson's vehicle and got a hit. His car was spotted this morning on Highway 2, heading toward Duluth. But, Sheriff, the interesting part is the timestamp. He was on that highway at 7:45 a.m., 2 hours before he showed up at the Miller house to talk to Ms. Chen." Sheriff Garcia looked at Sarah with grim understanding. If Henderson had been on Highway 2 at 7:45, he couldn't have driven back to Pine Lake in time to spontaneously visit her at the house. His appearance had been planned, coordinated. He'd known exactly when to show up, exactly when she would be most vulnerable. "Ms. Chen," Sheriff Garcia said quietly, "I think you need to leave town immediately. And I think you need to assume that whoever is responsible for these disappearances knows everything about your investigation." Sarah nodded, though her mind was reeling with implications. If Henderson was involved, how many other people in Pine Lake were part of this conspiracy? How long had they been watching her family, planning for the day when someone would return to the house and discover their secret? As she gathered her things to leave, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that Danny was still out there somewhere, still trapped in a breathing room that she hadn't found yet. The evidence in his closet had been a message, a breadcrumb trail leading to something larger and more horrible than she'd imagined. She was leaving Pine Lake, but she wasn't giving up. Somewhere in this peaceful Minnesota town, a 50-year conspiracy was unraveling. And Sarah Chen was going to be the one to expose it, no matter how dangerous the truth turned out to be. Sarah drove back to Minneapolis with her rearview mirror filled with the fading lights of Pine Lake, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being followed. Every set of headlights that stayed behind her for more than a few miles made her pulse quicken, and she found herself taking random exits just to see if anyone would follow. By the time she reached her apartment in the Uptown district, she was exhausted and paranoid, jumping at every shadow. Her one-bedroom apartment felt like a sanctuary after the horror of the breathing room, but even here, Sarah couldn't relax. She pulled the curtains closed and double-checked the locks on her door and windows. If Henderson and his associates could clean out an entire hidden room in 20 minutes, what else were they capable of? Sarah spread Henderson's newspaper clippings across her kitchen table, studying the pattern of disappearances he'd identified. Jenny Morrison, 1973. Timothy Walsh, 1981. Danny Chen, 1995. Lily Morrison, 2022. The gaps weren't random. They followed a deliberate schedule, as if someone was harvesting children according to a predetermined timeline. She pulled out her laptop and began researching each case in detail. What she found made her stomach turn. All of the missing children fit a specific profile. Intelligent, creative kids between 6 and 12, often described by teachers as gifted or special. All had disappeared under circumstances that left no physical evidence, no signs of struggle, no witnesses, no trace of how they'd vanished. More disturbing still, Sarah discovered that several of the families had left Pine Lake within a year of their child's disappearance, but not all of them had survived the trauma intact. Timothy Walsh's father had committed suicide 2 years after his son vanished. Jenny Morrison's mother had died in what was ruled an accidental overdose, though friends reported she'd been receiving threatening letters in the weeks before her death. Sarah's research was interrupted by her phone ringing. She glanced at the caller ID and saw an unknown Pine Lake number. For a moment, she considered letting it go to voicemail, but curiosity won out. "Hello? Sarah? This is Sheriff Garcia. I hope you made it home safely." "Yes, I'm in Minneapolis. Have you found Henderson?" "Not yet, but we've made some interesting discoveries. The crime scene team found more than just that handprint in your brother's closet. There's an entire network of passages running through the walls of your house, spaces that don't appear on any of the original blueprints. Someone modified that house extensively, probably over a period of years." Sarah felt her mouth go dry. "You're saying the whole house is compromised?" "Large parts of it. We found access points in the basement, the attic, and several rooms on the first floor. It's like someone turned your family home into a maze with hidden chambers throughout. The question is, When were these modifications made? And did your parents know about them? The implication hit Sarah like a physical blow. If these passages had existed when her family lived in the house, if her parents had known about them. Sheriff, are you suggesting my parents were involved in Danny's disappearance? I'm not suggesting anything yet. But Sarah, we need to consider all possibilities. The modifications to that house would have required significant time and resources. They couldn't have been done secretly while your family was living there unless someone in the house was cooperating. Sarah's mind raced back through her childhood memories, looking for signs she might have missed. Her father working late in the basement, claiming he was organizing tools. Her mother's nervous habits that had seemed to worsen in the months before Danny's disappearance. The dinner party that night, had it been planned to provide cover for something? There's something else, Sheriff Garcia continued. We found financial records in one of the hidden spaces. Bank statements, property deeds, what looks like payment schedules going back decades. Sarah, someone has been funding this operation for a very long time, and the money trail leads to some prominent families in Pine Lake. What kind of families? The kind with old money and political connections. The kind who could cover up missing children cases and suppress investigations. We're talking about a conspiracy that goes to the very top of this community. Sarah thought about the Morrison family. 2 children had disappeared with that last name, almost 50 years apart. Sheriff, are Jenny Morrison and Lily Morrison related? Grandmother and granddaughter. And Sarah, here's the interesting part. The Morrison family owns most of the commercial real estate in Pine Lake, including the building that houses our police station. They've been major contributors to every sheriff's campaign for the past 30 years. The pieces were starting to form a horrifying picture. Not just a single predator snatching children, but an organized network with the resources to cover their tracks and the influence to control the investigation. Sheriff, how do we know you can trust your own department? We don't. That's why I'm calling you on my personal phone from my home. Tomorrow, I'm driving to Minneapolis to meet with FBI agents from the Minneapolis field office. This is too big for local law enforcement, and there are too many potential conflicts of interest. Sarah felt a mix of relief and terror. Relief that someone in authority believed her. Terror at the scope of what they were uncovering. What do you need from me? Everything you can remember about the months before Danny's disappearance. Any changes in your parents' behavior, any new people who entered your family's life, any modifications to the house that you might have noticed. Also, I need you to think about whether your parents ever mentioned Walter Henderson or any of the other families involved in this conspiracy. After hanging up with Sheriff Garcia, Sarah made herself a strong cup of coffee and began the painful process of excavating her memories from 1995. She remembered her parents seeming stressed that fall, arguing in whispered conversations that stopped whenever she entered the room. Her father had started drinking more heavily, claiming it was work stress from his job at the insurance company. Her mother had become obsessive about home security, installing new locks and checking them multiple times each night. But the most disturbing memory was one she'd suppressed for years. About a month before Danny disappeared, Sarah had woken in the middle of the night to use the bathroom. As she'd passed Danny's room, she'd heard voices, adult voices, speaking in whispers. When she'd peeked through the crack in his door, she'd seen Danny sitting up in bed, talking to someone she couldn't see clearly in the darkness. At the time, she'd assumed Danny was having trouble sleeping, and her parents were comforting him. But now, with the knowledge of the hidden passages throughout the house, Sarah realized someone else could have been in that room. Someone could have been visiting Danny at night, grooming him for what was to come. Sarah's laptop chimed with an ease. Incoming email from an address she didn't recognize. White Rabbit 1973@protonmail.com. The subject line made her blood freeze. About your brother. With trembling fingers, she opened the message. Sarah, you've stumbled onto something much larger than you realize. The people who took Danny are still active, and they know you're investigating. Walter Henderson was just a middleman. The real power behind this conspiracy reaches much higher. If you want to find out what really happened to your brother, meet me tomorrow at the Stone Arch Bridge in Minneapolis, noon, South Side. Come alone. Trust no one from Pine Lake, including Sheriff Garcia. The truth about Danny is more horrible than you imagine, but he might still be alive. A friend who escaped. Sarah stared at the message for a long time, her mind reeling with possibilities. Someone claiming to have escaped from the same people who took Danny wanted to meet with her. But was this a genuine offer of help, or a trap designed to lure her out of the safety of her apartment? The email had been sent from Jenny Morrison, the first child to disappear in Henderson's timeline. If this was really from her, if she'd somehow survived and escaped after almost 50 years, then everything Sarah thought she knew about these disappearances was wrong. She looked out her apartment window at the Minneapolis skyline, at the thousands of lights representing normal people living normal lives. Tomorrow, she would have to decide whether to trust a mysterious email from a woman who should be dead, or to wait for Sheriff Garcia and the FBI to untangle a conspiracy that had been 50 years in the making. But as Sarah looked at the message again, one detail jumped out at her. The email address ended with 1973, the year Jenny Morrison had disappeared, and the sender had signed themselves as a friend who escaped. If this was really Jenny Morrison, if she'd somehow survived decades of captivity and found a way to communicate with the outside world, then Sarah might be Danny's only hope of rescue. The breathing room in her house had been a message, a breadcrumb trail leading to something larger. Tomorrow, she would follow that trail, no matter where it led. Sarah barely slept that night, her mind churning with questions about the mysterious email. Every time she drifted off, she jerked awake with visions of the breathing room and that collection of children's teeth. By morning, she'd made her decision. She would go to the bridge meeting, but she wouldn't go unprepared. She spent the morning researching everything she could find about Jenny Morrison's disappearance in 1973. The newspaper accounts were sparse. A 7-year-old girl who vanished from a church carnival, last seen heading toward the parking lot with an ice cream cone. The search had lasted 2 weeks, involving hundreds of volunteers and multiple law enforcement agencies. No trace of Jenny had ever been found. But what caught Sarah's attention were the follow-up articles from subsequent years. Jenny's family had remained in Pine Lake for another 5 years after her disappearance, with her parents becoming increasingly vocal about their belief that local authorities weren't doing enough to find their daughter. Then, abruptly, the articles stopped. The Morrison family had sold their house and left town, and there were no more mentions of Jenny's case in the local paper. Sarah arrived at the Stone Arch Bridge 30 minutes early, positioning herself where she could observe anyone approaching from either direction. The historic bridge spanning the Mississippi River was a popular tourist destination, busy enough to provide cover, but open enough to prevent ambushes. She wore a bright red jacket, as specified in a follow-up email she'd received that morning, and carried a small recorder in her pocket in case the meeting provided information the FBI would need. At exactly noon, a woman approached from the south side of the bridge. She appeared to be in her late 50s or early 60s, with prematurely gray hair and the kind of pale complexion that spoke of years spent indoors. She walked with a slight limp, favoring her left leg, and her eyes darted constantly around the bridge as if watching for threats. "Sarah?" the woman asked quietly as she drew near. "Are you Jenny Morrison?" The woman nodded, settling onto the bench beside Sarah. Up close, Sarah could see the effects of whatever trauma this woman had endured. Her hands shook slightly, and there were scars on her wrists that looked old but deliberate. "I know this is hard to believe. I know you're wondering if this is some kind of trap." The thought had occurred to me. Jenny pulled a photograph from her pocket, a school picture that matched the ones Sarah had seen in Henderson's research, showing a 7-year-old girl with pigtails and a gap-toothed smile. But she also had something else, a hospital bracelet from Hennepin County Medical Center, dated just 6 months ago. "I escaped last Christmas," Jenny said quietly. "After 49 years, I finally found a way out. But Sarah, your brother is still there. They're all still there." Sarah's heart raced. "Danny's alive?" "As of 6 months ago, yes. But he's not. He's not the same as when they took him. None of us are. What they do to us in those rooms, what they make us become." Jenny's voice trailed off, and she stared at the river flowing beneath them. "What rooms? Where are they keeping the children?" "It's not just one place. There's a whole network of facilities throughout central Minnesota, connected by underground tunnels. The breathing room you found in your house was just an entrance point, a way to transport children to the main complex." Jenny pulled out a hand-drawn map, spreading it carefully on the bench between them. It showed what looked like a sprawling underground network centered beneath Pine Lake, with tunnels extending outward like the spokes of a wheel. "They've been building this for decades. Each family that joins the conspiracy contributes resources, money, property, political influence. In exchange, they get access to the children." Sarah's stomach lurched. "Access for what?" "Different families have different interests. Some want servants. Others want medical test subjects. A few want children to replace ones they've lost." Jenny's voice became barely a whisper. "And some just enjoy having complete power over young lives." The scope of what Jenny was describing was almost incomprehensible. Not just a kidnapping ring, but an entire parallel society built around the exploitation of children. "How many victims are there?" "When I escaped, there were maybe 30 or 40 children in the main complex, ranging from age 6 to late 20s. But Sarah, you have to understand, they don't just keep us as children. They have medical facilities down there, ways to slow aging, to keep us dependent on them for survival. I'm 60 years old, but my body thinks it's still in its 50s because of what they've done to me." Sarah studied Jenny's face, looking for signs of delusion or fabrication, but the woman's details were too specific, too consistent with what Sarah had discovered. "Why did they let you escape?" "They didn't let me escape. I found a weakness in their security during a medical transport." "But Sarah, I think they wanted me to contact you. I think this is all part of a larger plan." "What kind of plan?" Jenny folded up her map, her hands shaking more noticeably. "Your family wasn't chosen randomly. Your father worked for Morrison Insurance Company, handling policies for half the families involved in the conspiracy. Your mother was a teacher at Pine Lake Elementary, where she had access to records on hundreds of children. They were recruited, gradually, brought into the organization over a period of years." Sarah felt as if the ground was shifting beneath her feet. "My parents were part of this?" "Reluctantly, at first. They were told it was a research project, a way to study gifted children and provide them with enhanced educational opportunities. By the time they realized what was really happening, Danny had already been selected as a candidate. Selected for what? Jenny's pale eyes met Sarah's, and what Sarah saw there made her blood run cold. To become the next generation of leadership. The consortium is aging, Sarah. They need young, intelligent minds to carry their work forward. Danny wasn't taken to be a victim. He was taken to be groomed as a future administrator. The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. If what Jenny was saying was true, then Danny hadn't just been kidnapped. He'd been recruited, indoctrinated, turned into one of them. But he was only 8 years old. They start the conditioning young. 27 years of psychological manipulation, medical treatments, and isolation from the outside world. Sarah, even if we rescue him, I don't know if he'd want to be rescued. Sarah stared at the river, trying to process what she'd learned. Her brother was alive, but possibly transformed into something unrecognizable. Her parents had been complicit in his disappearance, even if they'd been deceived about the ultimate purpose. And somewhere beneath the peaceful town of Pine Lake, an entire shadow society continued to operate with impunity. There's something else, Jenny continued. Sheriff Garcia isn't who you think she is. Her family has been part of the conspiracy for generations. She's not investigating these disappearances. She's managing them. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from Sheriff Garcia. FBI meeting delayed. Need to discuss new evidence. Can you return to Pine Lake this afternoon? Don't go, Jenny said urgently. They know you're getting close to the truth. If you go back there, you'll disappear just like the rest of us. Sarah looked at the text message, then at Jenny's desperate face. Everything in her rational mind told her to trust law enforcement, to work within the system. But Jenny's story explained too many inconsistencies, answered too many questions that had been nagging at her. If I don't go back, how do we rescue Danny and the other children? Jenny pulled a small device from her pocket, a GPS tracker with coordinates already programmed in. There's another entrance to the complex, one they don't monitor as carefully. It's in the state forest about 20 miles north of Pine Lake. If you're willing to take the risk, I can guide you in. Sarah looked at the GPS device, then back at Jenny. She was being asked to choose between trusting the authorities and trusting a woman who claimed to have escaped from a decades-old conspiracy. Both choices carried enormous risks. But as she thought about Danny trapped somewhere underground, possibly transformed beyond recognition, but still alive, Sarah realized she'd already made her choice. She took the GPS device and stood up from the bench. When do we go? Jenny smiled for the first time since they'd met, and Sarah could see traces of the 7-year-old girl she'd once been. Tonight. We go tonight, while they're distracted by the heat your investigation has brought down on them. Sarah, I need you to understand. Once we do this, there's no going back. They'll never stop hunting us. Then we better make sure we get all of them the first time. As Sarah walked away from the bridge, she felt as if she was crossing a threshold from which there would be no return. Behind her lay everything she'd believed about her family, her brother's disappearance, and the nature of the world itself. Ahead lay only darkness, and the slim hope that somewhere in that darkness, Danny Chen was waiting to be rescued. Sarah drove north from Minneapolis as evening shadows lengthened across the Minnesota landscape, her hands gripping the steering wheel, so tightly her knuckles had gone white. In the passenger seat, Jenny Morrison sat quietly, occasionally checking a battered cell phone and scanning the road behind them for signs of pursuit. Neither woman had spoken much since leaving the city, both lost in their own thoughts about what lay ahead. The GPS coordinates Jenny had provided led them to a remote section of Chippewa National Forest, where thick stands of pine and birch trees created a canopy so dense that twilight arrived early. Sarah pulled her Honda onto a barely visible logging road and followed it for 2 miles through increasingly rough terrain until Jenny finally told her to stop. "We walk from here," Jenny said, shouldering a small backpack she'd brought. "The entrance is about half a mile through the woods, but we need to be careful. They have motion sensors throughout this area." Sarah checked her own supplies: flashlight, phone with emergency contacts programmed in, the small recorder that had captured Jenny's story, and a canister of pepper spray she'd bought that afternoon. It felt inadequate for what they were attempting, but Jenny had insisted they couldn't bring anything that might be detected by security systems. The forest was eerily quiet as they made their way through the underbrush, following animal trails that seemed to wind randomly through the trees. Jenny moved with surprising confidence for someone who claimed to have been underground for nearly 50 years, navigating by landmarks that were invisible to Sarah. After 20 minutes of walking, they reached a small clearing dominated by what looked like a concrete utility building. "Electrical substation," Jenny explained, pointing to the warning signs posted around the structure. "Perfect cover for an entrance to an underground facility. No one questions why an electrical company would need to access this area regularly." She led Sarah around to the back of the building, where a maintenance panel had been modified with additional locks and what looked like a keypad security system. Jenny pulled a small electronic device from her backpack and connected it to the keypad. After a few seconds, the locks clicked open. "Gift from another escapee," she said in response to Sarah's questioning look. "There are more of us out here than the consortium realizes. We stay in touch, share information, help each other when we can." The door opened onto a staircase that descended into darkness. Jenny pulled out a small LED flashlight and started down, with Sarah following close behind. The stairs were concrete and well-maintained, nothing like the rough basement steps Sarah had expected. After descending what felt like 3 stories, they reached a corridor lined with smooth metal panels. "This is the outer ring of the complex," Jenny whispered. "Transportation and utility tunnels mostly. The residential areas are deeper, and the administrative levels are deepest of all." They moved through the corridor, past branching passages that stretched away into darkness. Sarah noticed that everything was clean and well lit, more like a modern office building than the dungeon she'd imagined. The air had a chemical smell, not unpleasant, but artificial, like the scent of a hospital or laboratory. "How big is this place?" Sarah asked. "The main complex has 7 levels and extends for miles in every direction. They've been building and expanding for decades. Some of the newer sections have better security, but this old transport level is mostly automated." They reached an intersection where a small electric cart sat on rails embedded in the floor. Jenny checked her phone again, then gestured for Sarah to climb aboard. "We need to move faster now. I told you they'd be distracted tonight, but that window won't last forever." The cart moved smoothly along the rails, and carrying them deeper into the vast underground atrium. Sarah watched the walls flash by, noting the occasional numbered 5 stories tall, and what looked like observation connected by walkways. Behind some of those windows, like residential glimpses of built into the walls, like comfortable gardens grew under full living spaces that would have seemed the illusion of sunlight, if not for the absence of windows and young adults heavy locks on the doors. Some playing games. Are there children? Others tending the gardens, doors, or reading in comfortable seating areas. Some of them. It looked like a utopian community. You need to prepare yourself for what we're going to find. Beautiful and serene. The children here aren't prisoners in the traditional sense. That every adult supervisor, many of them have been here so long they think of this as home. And there were no doors leading to the outside. To believe the outside world is dangerous. This wasn't a community. That the consortium, it was an elaborate prison designed to make captivity feel like paradise. Phase 1 of their operation, Jenny explained quietly. Children who've been here less than 5 years, still undergoing initial conditioning. They're told this is a special school for gifted children, that their families sent them here for advanced education. Do they try to escape? At first, some do, but the security systems are designed to make escape seem impossible, and the psychological conditioning is very sophisticated. After a few years, most children stop thinking about the outside world. They accept this as their reality. Sarah scanned the faces of the children in the atrium, looking for any sign of Danny. She saw kids of various ages, all clean and well-dressed, all seemingly content with their surroundings. But there was something wrong with their expressions, a kind of blankness, as if some essential spark had been extinguished. Where would Danny be after 27 years? Jenny's expression grew somber. Level 6. Administrative Training. Sarah, I need to warn you again. The man you find down there may not be the brother you remember. They descended deeper into the complex, past levels labeled with clinical designations, educational services, medical research, behavioral modification, advanced training. At each level, Sarah caught glimpses of more elaborate facilities. Laboratories, classrooms, what looked like small apartment complexes. The scope of the operation was staggering. Finally, they reached level 6. Unlike the upper levels, this area felt more like a corporate office building, with carpeted hallways and numbered offices. Jenny led Sarah through a maze of corridors, to a section marked Administrative Personnel, Authorized Access Only. Danny's office is down this hall, Jenny whispered. But Sarah, there's something I haven't told you. He's not just a prisoner here anymore. They've given him responsibilities, authority over other captives. He helps run their operation. Sarah felt her stomach drop. You're saying he's become one of them? I'm saying the line between victim and perpetrator gets blurred after enough time. Danny may not want to be rescued, and he may not be innocent anymore. As they approached the office Jenny had indicated, Sarah heard voices coming from within. One of them made her heart stop. It was older, deeper than she remembered, but unmistakably her brother's voice. Danny was alive, and he was in that room. But what Jenny had told her cast his survival in a horrifying new light. After 27 years of conditioning, psychological manipulation, and gradual integration into the consortium's hierarchy, how much of her little brother would be left? Sarah reached for the door handle, knowing that whatever she found on the other side would change everything. The brother she'd mourned for nearly 3 decades was about to become real again, but he might be unrecognizable. And if Jenny was right about his role in the consortium's operations, rescuing him might mean confronting the possibility that he'd become complicit in the very system that had destroyed his childhood. The voices in the room grew louder, and Sarah heard Danny laugh, a sound that should have filled her with joy, but instead made her blood run cold. There was something wrong with that laugh, something that suggested the 8-year-old boy she'd loved had been replaced by someone else entirely. Sarah took a deep breath and opened the door. The office beyond the door was elegantly appointed, with dark wood furniture, expensive-looking artwork, and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves that wouldn't have been out of place in a law firm or bank. Behind an imposing desk sat a man Sarah would never have recognized as her brother, if not for his distinctive green eyes, the same shade that had made Danny so striking as a child. The man before her was tall and lean, probably around 6 feet, with perfectly groomed dark hair that showed no trace of gray despite his 35 years. He wore an expensive charcoal suit and spoke into a headset with the confident tone of someone accustomed to authority. But it was his eyes that made Sarah's stomach clench. They were Danny's eyes, but cold now, calculating in a way that made her skin crawl. Need the Morrison girl transferred to level 3 by tomorrow, he was saying into the headset. Her conditioning is proceeding ahead of schedule, and Dr. Henderson wants to begin the next phase of integration. Sarah's blood froze. Morrison girl. That had to be Lily, the 7-year-old who'd disappeared in July. Danny wasn't just a victim of this conspiracy. He was actively participating in the abuse of other children. The man who had been her brother looked up as Sarah and Jenny entered, and his expression shifted from mild surprise to something that might have been recognition. But there was no joy in his face, no emotion at all beyond professional interest. "I'll call you back," he said into the headset, then stood to face them. "Sarah, I wondered when you'd finally find your way down here." "Danny?" Sarah's voice came out as barely a whisper. "I haven't been called that in many years. I'm Daniel now, Daniel Chen Morrison, Administrative Director of Youth Development." He gestured to chairs in front of his desk, as if this were a perfectly normal business meeting. "Please, sit down. We have a lot to discuss." Sarah remained standing, studying this stranger who wore her brother's face. "I came here to rescue you." Daniel's laugh was the same one she'd heard from the hallway, rich and warm, but somehow empty. "Rescue me? Sarah, look around. Do you think I need rescuing?" He gestured to his elegant office, his expensive clothes, the obvious markers of success and authority. "I have a meaningful career, a comfortable life, and the respect of my colleagues. What exactly would you be rescuing me from?" "From this." Sarah's voice grew stronger. "From whatever they've done to you. Whatever they've made you become. Danny, these people kidnapped you when you were 8 years old. They stole your childhood, your family, your entire life." "They gave me a better life," Daniel corrected smoothly. "A life with purpose, with clarity. Do you know what I was before I came here? A confused child in a dysfunctional family. Destined for mediocrity. They showed me my potential, helped me become something greater." Jenny stepped forward, her face pale but determined. "Daniel, I know you remember me. I helped take care of you when you first arrived. You were so scared, so young. You cried for your family every night for months. For just a moment, something flickered in Daniel's eyes, a flash of the child he'd once been. But it was gone almost immediately, replaced by that same cold calculation. "Jenny Morrison, I heard you'd escaped. Frankly, I'm disappointed in you. After everything the consortium did for you, provided for you, this is how you repay their generosity?" "Generosity!" Jenny's voice cracked with emotion. "They stole 50 years of my life. They turned me into a laboratory rat, experimented on me, used me." "They gave you immortality," Daniel interrupted. "You're 60 years old, but look 50. You've lived longer than any normal human lifetime would have allowed. And instead of appreciating that gift, you run away like an ungrateful child." Sarah stared at her brother in horror. This wasn't just Stockholm Syndrome or psychological conditioning. This was complete ideological conversion. Daniel genuinely believed that his kidnappers had done him a favor, that the conspiracy was benevolent rather than evil. "Danny, what about our parents? They spent their entire lives looking for you, mourning you. Mom died believing she'd failed to protect you." Daniel's expression softened slightly, but not with the warmth Sarah had hoped for. "Our parents were weak people who couldn't see the bigger picture. They were given the opportunity to join something magnificent, to be part of humanity's evolution, and they chose fear instead. Their suffering was unnecessary, a consequence of their own limitations. Their suffering was because their son was stolen from them. Their son was upgraded. Daniel moved around his desk, and Sarah noticed he walked with the same confident stride she remembered from their father. "Sarah, I know this is difficult for you to understand. You've lived your entire life in the narrow, constrained world above ground. You think in terms of freedom and choice, not recognizing that those concepts are illusions designed to keep people from reaching their true potential." Sarah looked around the office, noting details she'd missed before. On the walls were photographs of Daniel with various groups of children, award ceremonies, graduation events, what looked like summer camp activities. In all of them, Daniel appeared to be in a position of authority, a teacher or administrator guiding young minds. "What do you do here, Danny?" "I oversee the integration process for new acquisitions. Children who show exceptional potential are brought here for development, and I help them understand the opportunities they're being offered. It's deeply rewarding work." The clinical language made Sarah's skin crawl. "You mean you help brainwash kidnapped children?" "I help them transcend the limitations imposed by conventional society." "Sarah, you have no idea what we're accomplishing here. We're creating a generation of enhanced human beings, more intelligent, more capable, freed from the petty concerns that cripple normal people. These children will inherit the earth." Jenny grabbed Sarah's arm. "We need to go. Now. He's not going to come with us voluntarily, and security will have detected our presence by now." But Sarah couldn't tear herself away from this stranger who had once been her beloved little brother. "Danny, please, I know you're still in there somewhere. Remember when we used to build blanket forts in the living room? Remember how you used to sneak into my room during thunderstorms because you were scared?" For a moment, Daniel's composure cracked. Sarah saw pain flash across his features, followed by something that might have been longing. But when he spoke again, his voice was steady. "Those memories belong to someone who no longer exists. That frightened child was weak, dependent, limited by the narrow thinking of his environment. I'm grateful every day that I was given the chance to become something better." "What about Marcus?" Sarah pressed. "Your friend who was there the night you disappeared? He never recovered from whatever he saw. He's been in psychiatric care for 30 years because of what these people did." Daniel's expression grew cold again. "Marcus was damaged goods, unsuitable for integration. Sometimes the selection process makes mistakes." The casual way he dismissed his childhood friend's lifelong trauma told Sarah everything she needed to know. Whatever had been done to Danny in this place, whatever combination of drugs, conditioning, and psychological manipulation had been used, it had been devastatingly effective. The brother she'd mourned was truly gone, replaced by this cold administrator who spoke of children as acquisitions and victims as damaged goods. An alarm began to sound somewhere in the building, a low, rhythmic tone that made Daniel straighten, with obvious concern. He touched his headset and spoke rapidly. "Security alert level 6. I need a containment team to my office immediately." He looked at Sarah with something that might have been sympathy. "I really had hoped you would understand. The consortium doesn't like to eliminate family members of integrated personnel, but they will if necessary. You've seen too much to be allowed to return to the surface." Sarah backed toward the door, pulling Jenny with her. "You're going to let them kill me?" "I'm going to recommend that you be evaluated for integration yourself. You're intelligent, educated, and you've demonstrated remarkable persistence in your investigation. With proper conditioning, you could become a valuable asset to our operation." The horror of what he was suggesting hit Sarah like a physical blow. Her own brother was planning to turn her over to the same people who had destroyed his childhood, who had spent decades turning him into a monster. "Sarah, we have to run!" Jenny urged. "They'll have the exits sealed within minutes." Sarah took one last look at the man who had once been Danny Chen, memorizing his face so she could carry the truth of what had happened to him. "I love you, Danny. I've never stopped loving you, and I never will. But I won't let you do to other children what was done to you." Daniel's mask slipped for just an instant, and Sarah saw a flash of the 8-year-old boy who had once hidden under her bed during thunderstorms. But then it was gone, replaced by the cold administrative efficiency of someone who had learned to see human beings as resources to be managed. "Goodbye, Sarah. I hope you make better choices than our parents did." As security footsteps echoed. In the hallway outside, Sarah and Jenny ran from the office, leaving behind any hope of rescuing the brother she'd spent 27 years mourning. Daniel Chen was truly dead, not taken by kidnappers, but murdered by the very people who had kept his body alive. Now Sarah had to focus on staying alive long enough to expose this conspiracy and prevent other families from suffering the same loss. Behind them, alarms continued to sound as the consortium mobilized to contain the breach of their deepest secrets. The real battle was just beginning. Sarah and Jenny sprinted through the carpeted corridors of Level 6 as the alarm continued, its urgent wailing. Behind them, Sarah could hear the measured footsteps of security personnel moving with military precision, their voices coordinating through radio communications that echoed off the walls. "Emergency protocols in effect," a cold female voice announced, over the facility's intercom system. "Unauthorized personnel on Level 6. All residents return to quarters immediately. Security teams to containment positions." Jenny led Sarah through a maze of administrative offices, her movements guided by decades of memory and desperation. "They'll seal the transport tunnels first," she panted as they ran. "But there's another way out. Maintenance shafts that connect to the old mine workings beneath the forest." They reached a heavy fire door marked "Emergency Access Only," just as Sarah heard the distinctive sound of elevator doors opening somewhere behind them. Jenny pulled out her electronic device and worked frantically on the door's security system, while Sarah watched the corridor they'd just traversed. "Got it," Jenny whispered, and the door clicked open to reveal a narrow stairwell that led both up and down. "We need to go up 3 levels, then down through the mining tunnels." They climbed, quickly, their footsteps echoing in the concrete stairwell. At each landing, Sarah could hear voices and activity on the other side of the fire doors. The consortium was mobilizing every resource to prevent their escape. The scope of the operation was becoming clear. This wasn't just a kidnapping ring, but a small city's worth of people all working together to maintain their secret society. "Level 3, Jenny said as they reached another door. "Residential areas. We need to move fast through here. The children will be in lockdown, but there will still be supervisors in the corridors." The door opened onto a hallway that looked like an upscale dormitory, with numbered doors and common areas furnished with comfortable chairs and entertainment systems. But the illusion of normalcy was broken by the heavy locks on every door and the surveillance cameras mounted at regular intervals. As they moved through the residential section, Sarah caught glimpses through small windows in the doors. Children and young adults sat quietly in their rooms, some reading, others staring at wall-mounted screens that showed peaceful nature scenes. Their faces held that same blank contentment she'd noticed in the atrium, the look of people who had learned to be satisfied with captivity. "How many children are here?" Sarah whispered. "In the entire complex? Maybe 200 at any given time." They cycle people through different phases. Some are released back to the surface after conditioning, others are kept for long-term projects, and a few are integrated into the consortium's administrative structure, like your brother. The casual way Jenny spoke about children being released made Sarah's stomach clench. "What do you mean, released?" Some of the children who come here are never reported missing. Runaways, children from troubled families, kids whose disappearance won't generate much police attention. After a few years of conditioning, they're given new identities and placed with consortium families as adoptees or foster children. They become sleeper agents, people who can function in normal society while maintaining loyalty to the consortium. The implications were staggering. Not only was the consortium kidnapping children, they were creating an entire network of conditioned agents who appeared to be normal citizens but were actually part of their organization. How many people in the outside world are working for them? Hundreds, maybe thousands. Teachers, police officers, social workers, politicians, anyone in a position to identify potential candidates or cover up disappearances. They reached another stairwell and began descending rapidly. The deeper they went, the older and cruder the construction became. The polished administrative levels gave way to rougher concrete, then finally to carved stone that looked like it dated back decades or even centuries. The original mine workings, Jenny explained, as they emerged into a tunnel that stretched away into darkness. The consortium didn't build this complex from scratch. They expanded and modernized something that was already here. The mine tunnels were cold and damp, with wooden support beams that creaked ominously as they passed. Sarah's flashlight beam played across abandoned mining equipment and rail tracks that disappeared into the darkness. The air smelled of earth and rust, a sharp contrast to the sterile atmosphere of the residential levels. Behind them, Sarah could hear the sound of pursuit getting closer. The consortium's security teams had tracked them to the mining level, and their flashlight beams were beginning to appear in the tunnels behind them. "How much further?" Sarah asked. "Maybe half a mile. But Sarah, there's something you need to know about the way out. It's not going to lead us to safety. It's going to lead us right into the heart of Pine Lake." "What do you mean?" Jenny's voice was grim as they jogged through the tunnel. "The mine workings connect to the basement of the Morrison Building, the same family that owns most of Pine Lake's commercial real estate. That's how they've been able to operate for so long. The entire town is built on top of their underground network." Sarah's mind reeled as she understood the full scope of the conspiracy. Pine Lake wasn't just a small town with a terrible secret. The town itself was a front for the consortium's operations. The missing children weren't being taken away from the community, they were being taken into it, hidden in a shadow world that existed directly beneath the feet of ordinary citizens. "Then we can't surface in Pine Lake," Sarah said. "If the whole town is compromised, we don't have a choice. The security teams are closing in, and this is the only way out. But Sarah, I think I know someone who can help us once we reach the surface." They climbed a set of rusted metal stairs that led to what looked like a subway platform carved into the rock. A small electric cart sat on rails that disappeared into a tunnel marked Morrison Building, authorized personnel only. "This is how they transport people and supplies between the complex and the town," Jenny explained as they climbed aboard the cart. "Most of the consortium members in Pine Lake never even see the underground levels. They just know that certain basements in town connect to the transportation network." The cart moved smoothly through the tunnel, and Sarah found herself thinking about her brother's transformation from victim to perpetrator. If the consortium's conditioning was effective enough to turn an 8-year-old kidnapping victim into a willing administrator, how many other people in Pine Lake had undergone similar processes? How many of the town's seemingly normal residents were actually products of decades-long psychological manipulation? The tunnel began to slope upward, and soon Sarah could see electric lighting ahead. They were approaching the Morrison Building, which meant they were about to surface in the middle of the very community that had been hunting missing children for half a century. "Jenny, who did you say could help us in town?" "Sheriff Garcia." Sarah's blood ran cold. You told me not to trust her. You said her family was part of the conspiracy." Jenny's expression was grim as the cart approached what looked like a loading dock carved into the rock. "They are. But Sheriff Garcia isn't like your brother. She was forced into her role, not conditioned from childhood. And I think she's been looking for a way out for years." As they climbed off the cart onto the underground loading dock, Sarah realized they were about to gamble their lives on the loyalty of a woman who might be their salvation or their executioner. Either way, they were trapped in Pine Lake, surrounded by people who had spent decades perfecting the art of making children disappear. The chase through the underground complex was over, but the real danger was just beginning. The Morrison Building's basement was a study in contrasts, half-legitimate storage space filled with office supplies and maintenance equipment, half-sophisticated loading dock designed to move people and materials to and from the underground complex. Sarah and Jenny emerged from the mining tunnel into fluorescent lighting that seemed harsh after their journey through the darkness below. "This way," Jenny whispered, leading Sarah toward a freight elevator that would take them to the building's main level. "But we need to be careful. The Morrison Building is probably the most heavily monitored location in Pine Lake." As if summoned by her words, the elevator doors opened to reveal Sheriff Garcia, with her hand resting on her service weapon. For a moment, the three women stared at each other in tense silence, and Sarah prepared to run or fight. But then, she noticed something in Garcia's expression, not the cold efficiency of a consortium member, but the desperate look of someone who had been backed into a corner. "Get in," Garcia said quietly. "We don't have much time." Sarah hesitated, remembering Jenny's warning about not trusting anyone from Pine Lake. But Jenny stepped forward into the elevator, and after a moment, Sarah followed. Garcia pressed the button for the third floor and turned to face them as the doors closed. "I've been monitoring consortium communications all night," Garcia said. "I know about the security breach, and I know they're looking for you. But I also know you found something in that underground complex that could finally bring this whole operation down." "Jenny told me your family is part of the conspiracy," Sarah said. Garcia's jaw tightened. "My family has been part of the consortium for 3 generations. My grandfather was one of the founding members. My father served as Pine Lake's sheriff for 30 years, and I inherited both the badge and the family obligations. But that doesn't mean I agree with what they're doing." The elevator opened onto a darkened office space, and Garcia led them through a maze of cubicles toward a corner office with windows overlooking Main Street. Below them, Pine Lake looked like any other small Minnesota town in the early morning hours. Quiet streets, closed shops, the peaceful facade that had hidden decades of horror. "How many people in Pine Lake know?" Sarah asked. "Directly?" "Maybe 50 families. But the consortium has connections throughout central Minnesota. Police departments, social services, family courts, medical facilities. They've created a network that can identify potential victims, suppress investigations, and cover up disappearances across multiple counties." Garcia pulled files from a cabinet and spread them across her desk. Sarah recognized some of the names. From Henderson's research, missing children cases dating back decades, all with investigations that had been quietly closed or transferred to other jurisdictions. "Why haven't you exposed them?" Jenny asked. Garcia's laugh was bitter. "With what? Evidence? The consortium has been operating for over 50 years, and they've learned how to cover their tracks perfectly. Every time someone gets close to the truth, they either disappear or have convenient accidents. 3 investigators from the FBI, field office in Minneapolis, have died in car crashes over the past 20 years, all of them while looking into disappearances in this area." Sarah studied the sheriff's face, looking for signs of deception. So why are you helping us now? Because you found physical evidence of their operation. The breathing room in your house, the underground complex, the children being held captive. That's proof that can't be explained away or covered up. But only if we can get that evidence to people who aren't part of the conspiracy. Garcia opened another file, this one containing what looked like federal contact information. I've been in secret communication with an FBI unit that specializes in organized crime. They've been investigating consortium activities for years, but they've never been able to get anyone inside the operation. You two are the first people to escape with detailed knowledge of their facilities. Then why not just call them now? Sarah asked. Because the consortium monitors all electronic communications in Pine Lake. Phone calls, internet traffic, even text messages. They have the capability to intercept everything. If I try to contact the FBI from here, they'll know immediately. Jenny moved to the window and looked down at the street. Then how do we get word to the outside world? Garcia pulled a set of car keys from her desk drawer. There's a back road out of town that connects to Highway 10 about 15 miles south. It's not monitored because it runs through private land, owned by families that aren't part of the consortium. If you can reach the highway, you'll be outside their communication blackout zone. Sarah took the keys, but something in Garcia's tone bothered her. You're not coming with us? I can't. My absence would be noticed immediately, and they need to believe I'm still loyal to the consortium. But more importantly, someone needs to stay here to document what happens next. Once you contact the FBI, they'll move quickly to shut down the operation. I need to be here to guide them to the evidence and help identify which consortium members are willing participants versus people who were coerced. The sound of vehicles approaching on the street below made all three women freeze. Through the window, Sarah could see black SUVs with tinted windows pulling up in front of the Morrison building. Men in dark suits emerged and moved toward the building's entrance with military precision. They've found us, Garcia said grimly. Back exit now. They moved quickly through the office space toward a rear stairwell, but the sound of footsteps in the building's main corridors told them they were running out of time. Garcia led them to a window that opened onto the building's fire escape, a metal structure that would take them down to the alley behind the building. Take my patrol car, Garcia said, handing Sarah another set of keys. It's parked in the alley, and it has communication equipment that won't be monitored by the consortium. Once you reach the highway, use the radio to contact State Police Dispatch. Tell them you have federal-level evidence of organized crime in Pine Lake and need immediate protection. Sarah pocketed the keys, but she could see the desperation in Garcia's eyes. What's going to happen to you? I'm going to buy you as much time as I can. The consortium trusts me because they think I'm just following family tradition. It might take them a while to realize I've switched sides. Jenny was already climbing through the window onto the fire escape. Sarah, we need to go now. But Sarah hesitated, studying Garcia's face. How do I know this isn't a trap? How do I know you're not just herding us toward another consortium facility? Garcia pulled her service weapon and handed it to Sarah, grip first. Because I'm giving you this. If I'm lying, if this is a trap, then shoot me and find another way out of town. The weight of the gun in Sarah's hand felt surreal. She'd never held a weapon before, never imagined she'd be in a situation where she might need to use one. But Garcia's gesture convinced her more than any words could have. No consortium member would give a weapon to someone they were trying to capture. Thank you, Sarah said simply. Garcia smiled, and for the first time since they'd met, it looked genuine. Thank you for giving me a chance to do the right thing. Now go save those children. Sarah climbed through the window and followed. Jenny down the fire escape into the alley behind the Morrison building. Garcia's patrol car was exactly where she'd said it would be. Keys in the ignition and radio equipment that looked more sophisticated than standard police communications. As they drove through Pine Lake's empty streets toward the back road, Garcia had mentioned Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched from every darkened window. How many of the town's residents knew about the consortium? How many were willing participants in the kidnapping and abuse of children? But they'd made it this far, and they had evidence that could finally expose the conspiracy. In the patrol car's radio, Sarah could hear the calm voice of State Police Dispatch, representatives of a law enforcement system that hadn't been corrupted by 50 years of consortium influence. Help was finally within reach, but Sarah knew the real battle was just beginning. The consortium had spent decades perfecting their operation, and they wouldn't give up without a fight. Behind them, in the Morrison building, Sheriff Garcia was about to face the consequences of her decision to help them escape. Sarah could only hope the woman's sacrifice would buy them enough time to reach the outside world with their terrible knowledge. The truth about Pine Lake was about to be exposed, but at what cost? Sarah and Jenny reached Highway 10 just as the eastern sky began to show the first pale hints of dawn. The moment Garcia's patrol car crossed the invisible boundary out of Pine Lake's communication blackout zone, the radio crackled to life with state police chatter that sounded wonderfully normal after their night in the underground complex. State Police Dispatch. This is Sheriff Garcia's unit requesting immediate priority assistance, Sarah said into the radio microphone, her voice shaking with exhaustion and adrenaline. I have 2 civilians with federal-level evidence of organized crime involving missing children. We need protection and immediate contact with FBI organized crime specialists. The response was swift and professional. Within 20 minutes, 2 state police cruisers had intercepted them on the highway, and an hour later, Sarah and Jenny found themselves in a secure conference room at the FBI's Minneapolis field office, facing a team of agents who listened to their story with expressions of growing disbelief and horror. Special Agent Rebecca Morrison, no relation to the Pine Lake family, she assured them, led the debriefing. She was a woman in her 40s with graying hair and the tired eyes of someone who had seen too much human cruelty. But even she seemed shaken by what Sarah and Jenny described. Let me make sure I understand, Agent Morrison said, reviewing her notes. You're telling us there's an organized conspiracy that has been kidnapping children in central Minnesota for over 50 years, that they maintain an underground complex capable of housing hundreds of people, and that they've corrupted local law enforcement and government officials across multiple counties? That's correct, Sarah said. And we have photographic evidence of the collection room I found in my family home, as well as detailed testimony from Jenny about the structure and operation of their facilities. Agent Morrison studied the photos on Sarah's phone, her expression growing grimmer with each image. The box of teeth, the children's belongings, the photographs spanning decades. This is consistent with what we'd expect to see from a long-term organized operation. But the scale you're describing is unprecedented. Another agent, a younger man named Davidson, leaned forward. Ms. Morrison, you said you escaped from this facility 6 months ago. Why didn't you contact law enforcement immediately? Jenny's laugh was hollow. Because I didn't know who to trust. After 50 years of captivity, after seeing how many people in positions of authority were part of the conspiracy, I was terrified that approaching the wrong law enforcement agency would just result in my being captured again. Agent Morrison nodded understandingly. That's not paranoia. That's a rational response to systematic corruption. We've been aware of anomalies in missing children cases throughout central Minnesota for years, but we've never been able to identify a pattern or get anyone inside the organization. She turned to a wall-mounted monitor and pulled up a map of Minnesota marked with colored pins. These represent unsolved missing children cases over the past 30 years. Look at the concentration around Pine Lake and the surrounding counties. Sarah studied the map and felt her stomach drop. The pattern was unmistakable. Dozens of pins clustered around Pine Lake, with smaller concentrations around other small towns throughout central Minnesota. How many children are we talking about? Over 200 missing children in the past 3 decades, all fitting similar profiles. Intelligent, creative kids between ages 6 and 12, often from families experiencing economic or social stress that might delay immediate reporting. Davidson pulled up another screen showing financial records. We've also been tracking unusual money flows in the region. Large cash transactions, property purchases through shell companies, donations to local institutions that seem designed to influence community leaders. The economic footprint is consistent with a major criminal organization. How quickly can you move against them? Sarah asked. Agent Morrison's expression was grim. That's the challenge. An operation this size and sophistication can't be dismantled with a simple raid. We need to coordinate with multiple agencies, identify all the participants, and locate every facility where children might be held. If we move too quickly, they could scatter the evidence and disappear the victims. The thought of Danny and the other children being moved or eliminated while the FBI planned their operation made Sarah's chest tighten. How long will that take? Weeks, possibly months for a full investigation. But we can move immediately to secure the main facility you described and rescue any children being held there. Agent Morrison picked up a secure phone and began making calls to coordinate the operation. As Sarah listened to her arranging search warrants, tactical teams, and Child Protective Services resources, the magnitude of what they were attempting began to sink in. This wasn't just about rescuing Danny. They were trying to dismantle a criminal organization that had operated with impunity for half a century. There's something else you need to know, Jenny said quietly during a break-in. The briefing. The consortium has contingency plans for this kind of exposure. If they believe their operation is compromised, they have protocols for eliminating evidence, including human evidence. Sarah's blood ran cold. You mean they'd kill the children? Or move them to backup facilities we don't know about? The consortium has resources and connections that extend far beyond Pine Lake. They could relocate their entire operation to another state within days if they feel threatened. Agent Morrison overheard the conversation and approached them with a secure tablet. That's why we need to move fast, but carefully. We've been in contact with Sheriff Garcia using encrypted communications. She's still in Pine Lake, still maintaining her cover, and she's feeding us real-time intelligence about consortium activities. The tablet screen showed a message from Garcia, time-stamped just 20 minutes earlier. Consortium leadership meeting called for 8 a.m., discussing containment protocols and asset relocation. Recommend immediate action before they can implement security measures. Sarah looked at her watch. It was 7:30 a.m. They had less than 30 minutes before the consortium might begin moving or eliminating the evidence they needed to prove the scope of the conspiracy. We have to go now, Sarah said urgently. If they start moving children or destroying evidence, we may never be able to prove what they've done. Agent Morrison nodded grimly. Tactical teams are already en route to Pine Lake. But Sarah, you need to understand. There's a good chance your brother won't want to be rescued. After 27 years of conditioning, he may resist any attempt to remove him from the only life he remembers. Sarah thought about her conversation with Daniel in his underground office, about the cold efficiency with which he'd discussed having her evaluated for integration into the consortium's operations. The brother she'd loved was gone, replaced by someone who saw children as resources to be managed and families as obstacles to be overcome. But she also remembered that brief moment when his composure had cracked, when she'd seen a flash of the frightened 8-year-old he'd once been. Maybe some part of Danny was still alive inside the administrator he'd become. Maybe it wasn't too late to reach him. "I want to be there when you raid the facility," Sarah said. "If there's any chance of reaching Danny, of helping him remember who he used to be, I need to try." Agent Morrison shook her head. "That's not possible. This will be a tactical operation, with heavily armed suspects and potential hostages. We can't risk civilian casualties." "I'm not a civilian anymore," Sarah replied firmly. "I'm the only person who knows the layout of that underground complex, the only one who's seen their security procedures firsthand, and I'm the only family member who might be able to reach the victims who've been conditioned to resist rescue." Jenny placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder. "She's right. Some of those children have been underground for years. They're going to be terrified of strangers, especially armed strangers. They'll need familiar faces, people who can explain what's happening." Agent Morrison studied both women for a long moment, then made a decision. "You can come, but you'll be in protective custody throughout the operation. The moment things go sideways, you're out of there." As FBI tactical teams assembled for the largest child rescue operation in Minnesota history, Sarah felt a mix of hope and terror. They were about to confront a conspiracy that had operated in the shadows for decades, and there was no guarantee they could save all the victims before the consortium implemented their contingency plans. But for the first time in 27 years, Sarah was going to see her brother again. And this time, she wasn't leaving without him. The FBI convoy approached Pine Lake from 3 directions simultaneously, with Sarah and Jenny traveling in an armored vehicle that followed the main tactical team toward the forest entrance Jenny had used the night before. Agent Morrison coordinated the multi-pronged assault through encrypted radio communications, her voice calm and professional despite the magnitude of the operation they were attempting. "Alpha Team, report status on Morrison building penetration," she said into her headset. "Alpha in position. Building secured, but basement access has been sealed with concrete. Looks like they poured it within the last few hours." Sarah's heart sank. The consortium had anticipated the raid and moved quickly to eliminate access points to their underground facility. "Can you break through?" Agent Morrison shook her head. "Not without heavy equipment and more time than we have. But we still have the forest entrance, and there are probably other access points we haven't identified yet." The convoy reached the electrical substation where Sarah and Jenny had entered the underground complex 12 hours earlier. FBI technicians swarmed the utility building, using sophisticated equipment to override the security systems Jenny had defeated with her simple electronic device. "Bravo Team, forest entrance secured," came the radio report. "But we're reading significant electronic activity from below. They know we're here." Sarah watched through the armored vehicle's reinforced windows as tactical teams in full combat gear descended into the stairwell that led to the underground complex. She'd never seen anything like the level of preparation and coordination the FBI was bringing to this operation. Dozens of agents, specialized equipment, child psychologists and medical personnel standing by to treat rescued victims. "Why so? Many people?" Sarah asked. Agent Morrison checked her tactical display. "Because we're not just conducting a rescue operation, we're documenting evidence of federal crimes that will require prosecuting hundreds of people across multiple states. Every room needs to be photographed, every document preserved, every victim interviewed. This could be the largest child trafficking case in U.S. history." The radio crackled with updates from the teams advancing through the underground levels. "Beta Team, at Level 1 residential areas. Doors are locked, but no signs of panic." Children appear to be in normal morning routines. Gamma Team at Level 3, administrative areas. Multiple subjects detained, requesting backup for evidence processing. Delta Team approaching Level 6. Heavy security presence, armed resistance. Possible. Sarah's pulse quickened at the mention of Level 6, where Daniel's office was located, where the consortium's leadership would be making their final stand. Agent Morrison, I need to get down there. Absolutely not. This is an active tactical situation with armed hostiles. The radio erupted with urgent chatter. Delta Team taking fire. Repeat, taking fire on Level 6. Multiple hostiles barricaded. In administrative section, Agent Morrison's expression grew grim as she coordinated additional tactical support. The consortium wasn't surrendering quietly. They were fighting back with the desperation of people who knew their 50-year operation was over. Charlie Team, divert to support Delta on Level 6, and get me a status report on the children's areas. We need to know if any hostages are being threatened. Jenny leaned forward, her face pale with concern. The consortium has contingency plans for this kind of situation. If they believe the operation is completely compromised, they might try to eliminate all the evidence. What kind of contingency plans? Fire, flooding, structural collapse. They've spent decades preparing for the possibility that law enforcement might eventually find them. As if summoned by her words, the radio crackled with an alarming update. All teams, be advised. We're detecting unusual heat signatures throughout the complex. Possible incendiary devices being activated. Agent Morrison grabbed her radio. Evacuation protocols now. All teams begin immediate withdrawal of children and evidence. This facility may be compromised. Through the tactical frequencies, Sarah could hear the controlled chaos of FBI teams racing to evacuate hundreds of children from an underground complex that might be minutes away from destruction. The consortium was implementing their ultimate contingency plan. If they couldn't maintain their operation, they would destroy all evidence of its existence. Delta Team requesting immediate support on Level 6. Subjects are not responding to commands and appear to be implementing some kind of scorched earth protocol. Sarah couldn't stand the waiting anymore. Agent Morrison, my brother is down there. If the consortium is destroying evidence, they might kill him too. Your brother is an adult member of a criminal organization who was shooting at federal agents 5 minutes ago. He's also a victim who was kidnapped when he was 8 years old. Please, let me try to reach him. Agent Morrison studied Sarah's face for a long moment, then made a decision that went against every protocol in the FBI handbook. You stay with me at all times, you wear full protective gear, and the moment I say we're leaving, we're leaving. They descended into the underground complex through the forest entrance, following the same route Sarah and Jenny had taken the night before. But now the tunnels were filled with FBI agents, rescued children being led toward evacuation points, and the acrid smell of smoke that suggested the consortium's incendiary devices were already active. The elevator to Level 6 was disabled, forcing them to take the emergency stairs. With each level they descended, the smoke grew thicker and the sounds of tactical operations grew louder. By the time they reached Level 6, Sarah could hear gunfire echoing through the administrative corridors. Delta Team, report status, Agent. Morrison called into her radio. We've got 6 hostiles barricaded in the main conference room, including your high-value target, Daniel Chen. They're demanding safe passage out of the complex in exchange for information about other consortium facilities. Sarah's heart lurched. Daniel was trapped in a standoff with federal agents, facing the choice between surrender and death. But he was also the only person who might have detailed knowledge of other consortium operations. Information that could lead to the rescue of children being held in facilities they hadn't yet discovered. I need to talk to him, Sarah said urgently. "If anyone can convince him to surrender, it's me." Agent Morrison hesitated, but the tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. "5 minutes," she said finally. "But you're going in with full protection and tactical support." They moved through smoke-filled corridors toward the conference room, where Daniel and the other consortium leaders had made their final stand. Through the haze, Sarah could see FBI tactical teams positioned behind improvised barriers, their weapons trained on the conference room doors. "Daniel!" Sarah called out, her voice carrying through the smoke. "It's Sarah. I want to talk." The pre-KT. Gunfire stopped abruptly, and after a moment, her brother's voice echoed from within the conference room. "Sarah, you shouldn't be here. This facility is going to be destroyed in less than 10 minutes. Then come out, surrender to the FBI, and help them find the other children." "You don't understand. The consortium's reach extends far beyond this facility. If I surrender, if I cooperate with federal authorities, they'll eliminate me and every other potential witness. There are no safe choices left." Sarah stepped closer to the barricaded doors, ignoring Agent Morrison's urgent gestures to stay back. "Danny, I know what they did to you. I know they stole your childhood and turned you into someone you never wanted to be. But it's not too late to choose who you want to become." There was a long silence from within the conference room. When Daniel spoke again, his voice carried a note of uncertainty that hadn't been there before. "The child you're trying to reach doesn't exist anymore, Sarah. He died in this place years ago." "No, he didn't. I saw him last night just for a moment. He's still in there, Danny. He's still my little brother who used to hide under my bed during thunderstorms." The smoke was getting thicker, and Agent Morrison touched Sarah's shoulder urgently. "We need to evacuate now. The structural integrity of this level is compromised." But Sarah couldn't leave without making one final attempt to reach the brother she'd lost so many years ago. "Danny, do you remember the blanket fort we built in the living room the week before you disappeared? You said it was our secret base, where we'd always be safe as long as we stayed together." Another long silence. Then, quietly, "I remember. We can be safe again, Danny. But you have to trust me. You have to choose to walk away from everything they made you become." The conference room doors opened slowly, and Daniel Chen emerged with his hands raised. He was still wearing his expensive suit, but now it was torn and stained with smoke. His green eyes, Danny's eyes, met Sarah's through the haze, and for the first time in 27 years, she saw her little brother looking back at her. "I'm sorry, Sarah," he said quietly, as FBI agents moved to secure him. "I'm so sorry for what I became." As tactical teams evacuated the remaining consortium members and rescued children from the burning complex, Sarah walked beside her brother toward the surface, toward sunlight and air that wasn't poisoned by decades of conspiracy and cruelty. The underground war was over, but the real battle, helping Danny remember who he'd been before the consortium destroyed his childhood, was just beginning. 3 months after the FBI raid on the Pine Lake Consortium, Sarah sat in a sterile conference room at the Federal Medical Center in Rochester, Minnesota, waiting to visit her brother. Daniel, she still struggled to think of him as Danny, was being held in protective custody while federal prosecutors built their case against the conspiracy. But he was also undergoing intensive psychological evaluation and treatment. Dr. Elizabeth Warren, the facility's chief psychiatrist, had explained that Daniel's case was unlike anything in the medical literature. 27 years of systematic psychological conditioning, combined with sophisticated medical interventions to slow aging and create dependency, had resulted in a personality structure that was simultaneously that of an adult administrator and a traumatized 8-year-old child. "He's making progress," Dr. Warren told Sarah during their monthly briefing. "The conditioning was extensive, but it wasn't perfect. Core memories from his childhood are beginning to resurface, and he's starting to show genuine remorse for his actions within the consortium. But Sarah, you need to understand that he may never fully recover the personality he had before his abduction." Sarah nodded, having heard similar assessments during previous visits. The man in the secure medical facility was a strange hybrid. Sometimes, speaking with the cold efficiency of the consortium administrator he'd become, other times breaking down in tears as childhood memories fought their way through decades of psychological manipulation. "How are the other children doing?" Sarah asked. "It varies by individual. The younger ones, those who were abducted more recently, are showing remarkable resilience. They're able to reintegrate with families or foster care with appropriate support. But the longer-term captives," Dr. Warren's voice trailed off. "Some of them have been institutionalized for so long they don't know how to function in normal society. We're working with specialists to develop rehabilitation programs, but it's going to be a long process." The door to the conference room opened, and Daniel entered, accompanied by 2 guards. He looked healthier than he had during the raid. Expensive suits had been replaced by casual clothes, and his hair had grown out from its perfect corporate styling. But his eyes still held that strange mixture of adult intelligence and childlike uncertainty. "Hello, Sarah," he said quietly, taking the seat across from her. "Thank you for coming again." "I'll always come, Danny. You're my brother." Something flickered in his expression at the use of his childhood name. Over the past 3 months, these flickers had become more frequent, more sustained. The 8-year-old boy who had vanished in 1995 was fighting his way back to the surface. "I've been remembering more things," Daniel said. "About before, about our family. I remember you teaching me to ride a bike in the driveway, and the way Mom would make pancakes shaped like animals on Saturday mornings." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. These were the first positive childhood memories Daniel had shared since his rescue. "Do you remember the night you disappeared?" Daniel's face grew troubled. "Pieces of it. Someone came to my room, not a stranger, someone I'd met before. They told me there was an emergency, that I needed to come with them quietly so I wouldn't wake you or our parents. I was scared, but they seemed so sure, so authoritative." "Who was it?" "I think it was Henderson. Walter Henderson. He was already recruiting for the consortium then, identifying families that could be useful to their operation." Daniel's voice grew bitter. "Our parents weren't random victims, Sarah. They were targeted because of their positions in the community, their access to information about children and families. Sarah had learned from the FBI investigation that Henderson had indeed been the consortium's primary recruiter for decades, using his position as a local historian to research families and identify potential targets. He'd been arrested 2 weeks after the raid, found hiding in a cabin in northern Wisconsin with evidence linking him to dozens of disappearances. The prosecutors say your testimony will be crucial to convicting the consortium leadership," Sarah said. Daniel nodded grimly. "I know everything about their operation, the financial networks, the political connections, the other facilities they maintained. I can help them prosecute everyone involved." He paused, his expression troubled. "But Sarah, testifying means reliving everything they did to me, everything they made me do to other children. I don't know if I'm strong enough for that." "You don't have to be strong alone," Sarah said, reaching across the table to take his hand. "I'll be there for every hearing, every deposition, every trial. We're family, Danny. We face things together." For the first time since his rescue, Daniel smiled. Not the cold, professional expression of the consortium administrator, but the genuine, warm smile of the little brother Sarah remembered. "Thank you. I know I have a long way to go before I can be the person I was supposed to become, but knowing you're here gives me hope." Dr. Warren had explained that Daniel might never fully integrate his two personalities, the traumatized child and the conditioned administrator. But in moments like this, Sarah could see that healing was possible, that the brother she'd mourned for 27 years was slowly finding his way home. The investigation into the Pine Lake Consortium had revealed the full scope of their operation. Over 400 children abducted across 5 decades, a network of underground facilities spanning 3 states, and corruption that reached into law enforcement, social services, and local government at every level. The trials would continue for years, but already dozens of consortium members had been convicted and sentenced to life in prison. Most importantly, nearly 200 children and young adults had been rescued from various consortium facilities. Some, like Jenny Morrison, had been able to transition back to independent lives with extensive support. Others, particularly those who had been captive for decades, would require long-term care and rehabilitation. As Sarah prepared to leave after her visit with Daniel, she thought about how much her life had changed since that October morning when she'd returned to the family home on Sycamore Street. She'd lost the brother she remembered, but she'd gained something else, the knowledge that she'd helped expose one of the most horrific criminal conspiracies in American history. The breathing wall in Danny's closet had been more than just evidence of a crime. It had been a message, a breadcrumb trail that led to the rescue of hundreds of victims and the destruction of a shadow organization that had operated with impunity for half a century. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Agent Morrison. Jury came back guilty on all counts for the Morrison family leadership. Henderson got life without parole. Justice is being served. Sarah smiled as she read the message. The consortium that had stolen her brother's childhood and destroyed so many families was finally facing the consequences of their actions. The breathing wall had stopped breathing, the hidden rooms had given up their secrets, and the children who had vanished into the darkness were finally coming home to the light. It would take years for all the wounds to heal, but healing had begun. And for the first time in 27 years, Sarah Chen had her brother back, not the same as before, but alive, safe, and slowly remembering who he was meant to be. The nightmare that began in 1995 was finally over.